coding bootcamps are a subject of controversy. Critics of coding bootcamps defend the conventional university system, and these critics argue that bootcamp graduates do not have enough experience to write quality software. But the reality is that some bootcamp graduates have found success from this new educational path. After graduating high school, Kenny Tran attended one coding bootcamp and then spent some time at home, absorbed in his own personal projects. Eventually, he went to a second coding bootcamp, his form of graduate school. During this second bootcamp, Kenny worked on PurifyCSS, a module that can reduce the size of front-end projects by 60%. Today, Kenny works at the groundbreaking company Mesosphere, completing a career arc that proves that coding bootcamps are enough of an education to rival traditional university learning. If you enjoyed today's episode, which I know I did, please share it on Twitter or Facebook and tell your friends about your favorite episode. The way that this show grows is through word of mouth, so it's extremely helpful to me and the podcast if you mention it to your friends. Also, you can always send me an email at softwareengineeringdaily@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new show ideas and feedback. I really appreciate you listening, so thanks, and let's get on with this episode. I had a crazy idea a couple weeks ago. It's a photo sharing app that only has pictures of cats. When I finish my photo sharing cat application, I will be deploying it to Linode because Linode is the fastest hosted Linux provider. I don't want to get locked into a proprietary platform that's going to overcharge me as soon as my app gets popular. I just want a fast Linux server with simple pricing. Go to linode.com/sedaily and get $20 in free credit today. Plans start at $10 a month, so my free $20 will be plenty to launch my cat photo sharing app. Once I need to scale, I can use tools like node balancers and backups, and Linode has built-in dashboarding and metrics so that I can see the traffic to my Linode servers, and I can understand how many of my users are posting cat pictures and looking at each other's cat pictures. Go to linode.com/sedaily and get $20 in free credit today. The plans start at $10 a month, so it's a great deal. Thanks to Linode for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Now let's get on to this episode. Kenny Tran is the author of PurifyCSS and a contributor to Webpack. Kenny, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Hey, thanks for having me.
When a user opens up a web page, a large mass of code is processed by the browser, and this front-end code has been compressed to take up less space on the user's side. And this compression is always done by a front-end web developer who wrote that code. And you are one of those front-end developers. So give me an idea of what you are doing to reduce the size of your front-end code when I receive that code as a user on my browser.
Right. So in today's world, there's a lot of code that is like prepackaged, like frameworks and stuff. And like the benefit of frameworks is like you get to build things really quickly, really fast. But one of the downsides to that is you're going to have a lot of code that is essentially unused. So I created a module that pretty much tries to look for code that is unused and then strips it out of the files, which reduces the file size, which is really good. You know, better load times. You get to see Facebook quicker.
Absolutely.
Really
So we'll get into that. Before we talk about purifying, though, there are two steps to lowering the load speed of a web page that we typically have in the industry. And these are the steps that are known as concat and minify. Can you talk about these two steps? What do concat and minify refer to?
Right. So concat is before, like, let's say you have like two pages and stuff, and like you have a login screen, and then you have like your feed page where you see all the posts and stuff like that. So and each of these pages would need specific things. So you would have to make separate requests for all of these things that you need for these different pages. So concat basically combines all of the files, so you would just need to make one request. Now, like, why is that helpful? This is because every single time you make a request, there's a lot of overhead that you have to do. You got to send a lot of like weight back and forth, and that slows things down. So when you concat, you put all the files together, and you only have to do like the travel distance like once, which reduces the time.
And what about minify?
And yeah, for minify, now minify is where, like, we write code for the computer to like do a certain amount of steps, but we also write code for humans to read so we can work together. Minify, and because we work with other humans, we want to write it in a way that is readable. And to do that, we add a lot of sugar into the code that we write. Minifying essentially makes your code unreadable, but it compacts it so that the computer still understands what's going on. And like the code is absolutely unreadable, but it makes it much, much smaller. And again, this is for that benefit of reducing load time.
Your goal is to introduce another step between concat and minify, and you call this step purify. What does it mean to purify our CSS, and how does that fit into the two steps of concat and minify?
Okay, so basically you can imagine we have all these CSS files. You have like all these style files, and you combine them all into one. So that's concat, and then generally like the people would just concat and then minify it, and then like that would be all they do. But purifying, the way I imagined it is like after you concat all the styles together, you would purify it, which is basically looking for the dead weight in those files, like the code that doesn't actually do anything for your application. You'd strip that out, and then you would minify it, which ultimately reduces the weight of the files.
So you use the example of Bootstrap as something that we don't use all of the code from. Right. This is an example where we would get a lot of value out of using PurifyCSS. So explain, for those who don't know what Bootstrap is, I guess just briefly explain. I think most people do know what it is, but explain what it is and talk about why PurifyCSS is useful for projects that are using Bootstrap.
Yeah, so Bootstrap is something that Twitter created, and like I said before, it's like this CSS framework. It comes with a lot of prepackaged code, so you can make your website kind of look good really easily because like all these classes are given to you. So you can just, when you want to create like a small app, you can just start like running with it and have it styled nicely really quickly. So the problem with this is that, it's like they give you all these classes for you to use, but then rarely do you actually use every single one that they give you, which means there's a lot of dead weight. And that means that like the people who go to your small application that maybe is only using a percentage of Bootstrap, they're loading all of this extra like selectors, and it just makes your apps a lot slower to load. Yeah.
And in order to find out what parts of Bootstrap are not being used by a particular project, so if a user is using Bootstrap, PurifyCSS would find these parts that are not being used by the project, because Bootstrap is a gigantic file. You run text analysis on the code for that project in order to find out which modules within Bootstrap are actually being used. So what kinds of text analysis are you performing on code in order to find out which aspects of Bootstrap are not being utilized?
So basically, like, this is the way that we approached it. It's okay. So before, all right. So let me just back up, and like before purifying, there was this concept of there was another module called UnCSS, and what that module would do is like it would look at all your HTML files, look at the classes being used, and then basically, like, that's how they would extract the information, right? They look at all the classes used in the HTML and then strip out all the CSS that is like not those classes. Now, that's good, but it's not good enough for today's world because a lot of our classes come from JavaScript. So that's where we do the static analysis, which is basically we look at your JavaScript and HTML, and we basically just turn it into one huge string. Generally, the HTML, we can extract the classes from there. The JavaScript, we do interesting things with it, like we strip out things that are not strings and stuff like that. But we look at and then we turn that into one big string, and then we look at the words that come up, and we essentially all the classes that we know for sure aren't being used, we can remove, and it comes out to there are classes that there's a potential for it to being used that we still leave in. So actually, if you use Purify and use it on an app big enough, because there's so many words, there will still be some leftover classes that aren't being used that still ends up in the final CSS file. But then because we try to be safe with it, essentially, we take out the classes that we know for certain that aren't going to be used.
Is that because is there some inherent element of non-determinism for how the code loads, or is it just that the text analysis that you would have to do to be that comprehensive and that thorough is so sophisticated that PurifyCSS doesn't have that part implemented yet?
Well, it's because, you can create, because the classes come from JavaScript, it becomes really, really difficult. I mean, you can imagine, like, let's say you have a class called active, right? And then in your JavaScript, you like create the class active by adding act and then I've, so like it would be really difficult to do stuff like that. And you can imagine other ways in JavaScript where like the individual characters don't even show up, and maybe you do some crazy things like you make a request for it and other stuff like that. So there's a lot of like limitations that you can do just because we're doing static analysis. But that we really aim for, but like that's like the 0.01% use case. Like 99, you have to be really, you got to be doing some really weird stuff to hit that. We try to aim for like the usual case where, okay, you can imagine like button/active. Okay, you can imagine combining them. So button shows up, active shows up. So then we kind of like take that into consideration.
It seems like you would only have to run this purification once when you are ready to ship your app. So it's not a performance critical aspect of the application, and you can really get clever and greedy with the mechanisms that you use to perform the code analysis because you only have to run it once. Is that accurate?
That is pretty accurate. But I remember our first implementation ever. It was a super naive implementation. It was like we just turned your whole application into a string, and then we took all of the selectors in your CSS file, and then we basically just did like an index of, and that like on a really sizable application that took around like 100 seconds. Even though that was just like a really dumb implementation, we were just trying to see what would happen, like if it was even possible. So it's the performance wise, we've actually did have to focus on that, because even though it takes, let's say it takes like 20 seconds, right? I mean, that still kind of sucks, because you're going to want to test that locally, like yeah, sure, you use this external module, but you're going to want to test that it works like it says it does. So you're probably going to run that on like, on a listener or something. It's going to happen every single time you save. And 20 seconds is that would just suck. So we did focus on making it perform better.
How fast did you get it to for that big prototypical JavaScript application?
So big prototypical JavaScript application, we brought it down pretty well. It comes down to around 2 seconds, and that's like really bad scenarios.
Yeah.
So it's like that's doable, that's not too bad for if you're listening on save. That 2 seconds is not that bad.
So give me some numbers. How much smaller will my app get if I use PurifyCSS to reduce the giant prototypical JavaScript application? Right.
So actually, like there's a way, like there's no docs for this, which is something I need to work on. But like there's a way that you can use Purify that'll actually make it better. But like if you just do it, you just run it and throw all your files in there. It really depends on your application and stuff like that. But generally, you could reduce it by like 40%, 30%. And
so 40% of your overall code, you're saying?
Yeah. 40% of your overall code. It really depends on how, like, if you're using a CSS framework. I mean, if you're using if you never use a CSS framework for your application, you just wrote all the selectors, there's actually a good chance that, you're actually using a high percentage of the selectors that you created. But if you're using a framework, the chance of Purify reducing the file size is even higher. And there's actually interesting ways you can do it. Like I was saying before, is like when you pass in the HTML and JavaScript, I'm talking about JavaScript now, is that you don't really want to pass in files that pertain to making requests and other stuff like that. You only want to pass in the JavaScript that is focused on the views, because those are the only files that would actually contain classes. Like your JavaScript files that make requests to APIs, like they wouldn't really contain CSS classes. So if you don't pass those in, there's going to be less false positives. So if you do it really well, you can reduce it even further.
Got it. Yeah, it's super efficient. So most people who are building JavaScript applications, front-facing JavaScript applications, they would want PurifyCSS. I mean, most likely. And you built plugins for Grunt and Gulp that allow people to easily add PurifyCSS to their projects. For people who are not very familiar with front-end development, explain why these build tools are important. What are the purposes of Grunt and Gulp?
Yeah, so Grunt and Gulp, like, they make it really easy for you to do, like, tasks. Like before we were talking about concat and minify. Like, Grunt and Gulp, they allow you to create, like, this concat task that, you can run a command. You can run one command in your terminal or whatever, and then it would concat it for you. Then you can set it up so that it would minify it for you after that. And I mean, you can do a whole lot of things with basically like moving your files around, do whatever you need to do to go from development mode to production mode, and or anything else you need basically. So it's just a way for you to run tasks. And we created plugins for Grunt and Gulp, so that you can basically do what we wanted, which was concat and then purify and then minify. So that's why we created the plugins.
What is involved in writing a plugin for Grunt or Gulp?
So Grunt and Gulp, they actually one of my friends did the Grunt and Gulp plugins, but they have pretty good documentation on how to actually write it. But like they expose some functions. There's a lot of examples that you can look at for how to create the plugins. And yeah, like you basically just hook into the Grunt like cycle essentially.
Okay, well, after building plugins for Grunt and Gulp, you and your team were going to write a plugin for Webpack, which is another one of these build tools. And things got interesting when you started to work on that plugin. What happened when you decided to start building that plugin for Webpack?
All right, so I worked on this with a couple of my friends. We were kind of like, all right, you guys are going to create the Grunt and Gulp, and then, I'll do the Webpack plugin. And all right, that sounds cool, because like I thought Webpack was pretty cool, so I would work on the Webpack plugin. And then it turns out that there's no documentation to create Webpack plugins. So then the only thing you could really go off of was like Webpack has these internal plugins that it itself uses. So you would have these like plugin examples for you to go off of. I mean, even today, I'm not even confident that I could create a Webpack plugin just like straight up, but because there's just not enough documentation. I think that's like a general theme with Webpack is, like the creator of it, he's really time constrained, so doesn't have like the most docs in the world. But yeah, we basically just looked at example plugins, and then we had to read a lot of code, and we actually I had to dive into so much of the source code that actually made contributions to Webpack. That's how that started. That's how I started getting into the Webpack code and stuff like that. Actually,
and I think I looked at the GitHub commit frequency, and it was like I don't know the history of Webpack, but whoever the person is that started it has the vast majority of the commits. It's so much more than the second person. I think you were the second or third, and which is kind of unusual for a popular open source tool. Usually, if you have an open source tool that's used by a lot of people, it's usually committed to by a lot of people. But Webpack seems to be an exception.
Yeah, really.
And I guess what you're saying is a canonical lesson for some people that if you don't have documentation, it's pretty hard to contribute.
No, it's really hard to contribute. I think there's an actual Webpack issue that basically says like the code is too hard to follow. Like clean up the code. Like that was the GitHub issue. I remember reading that. But yeah, the Webpack. Yeah, it's really weird. It's an interesting project.
I mean, how is it taken? Because my understanding, I'm not deep into this community, but my understanding is the Webpack has, I guess, gotten more popularity than Grunt or Gulp. I don't know how these different build systems relate to one another, but my understanding is Webpack is a little more popular. Maybe you can give me some history on how these different build systems have evolved in different trajectories.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, Webpack is definitely like become popular. Like if you just look at the npm downloads for Webpack, it's insane. The growth is really insane. It's actually recent too. When I first started, when we created this thing for Webpack, like the growth wasn't even as quick as it is now. If you look at it now, it's insane. But I would definitely say it's like the more popular one out of Grunt and Gulp. But but yeah, I think the first one ever that came onto the scene was Grunt, and then Gulp came along. Basically, Gulp tried to make it like more readable and then like easier to use than Grunt and Gulp. And I think the big thing with the Webpack, the big thing with Webpack was like you can do code splitting. And it's like if we go back to that example that I was talking about before, it's you have like this login screen and then you have this feed page. And I think one of the original reasons why Webpack was made was because if you go to the login screen, you can actually, if you go to the login screen, you make one request and you get everything that you need, but only for that login screen. So if we go back to what I was saying about concat before, like they combine all the code for basically the login screen and the feed page. So you would make one request to get all of that. And then then later on you would think like, okay, well, why would I get the code for the feed page if I'm just going to the login page? Like now it becomes another problem and Webpack fixed that by allowing you to split your code into just the login page and then just the feed page. So like this is different from the original problem that concat was fixing, because like that problem was you're making too many requests, but you're making too many requests on the same page. Whereas what Webpack allows you to do is you make one request for each page, basically, which is like the best solution.
So back to the discussion of building a plugin for Webpack, though. How was it that this was so hard to do? Had nobody written plugins for Webpack before?
A lot of people, the plugin ecosystem was actually like it was there, but you really had to like read a lot of source code.
You had to reverse engineer the source code.
Exactly. Like it wasn't super easy for you to like ramp up, but it did actually exist. One of the the way that we got into Purify is that like originally we just wanted to create a Webpack plugin. Like we never wanted to do like the Grunt and Gulp and all that stuff. We didn't even want to do like the standalone Purify. Like all we were looking through the issues for Webpack, and we just wanted to make a contribution to Webpack. And one of the issues, and actually that issue is still up today, is that like somebody wanted a Webpack plugin for UnCSS. UnCSS is like the module I was talking about before, where it looks at your HTML and pulls out the classes. Basically, there was an issue on Webpack for somebody to create a plugin for that. And then that's all we wanted to do, pretty much. We just wanted to create a plugin for Webpack. And then once we started looking at UnCSS more, it just wasn't good enough because it only looked at the HTML. I mean, there were some ways for you to pull classes out of JavaScript, but it wasn't even robust enough. It wasn't even close to what it should be. So that's how we got into creating plugins for Webpack. That was our original goal in the beginning.
Before you even started working on PurifyCSS,
yeah,
you're saying?
Before we even started working on Purify, like we just wanted to create a Webpack plugin for UnCSS, and then it's really funny. Like we just saw a way to make it better. We did it, and then we posted it on to Hacker News, and it took off, and it was crazy.
Software engineers are always looking to automate their work. Software automation lets us get more done with the same number of resources. Investment automation works the same way. Wealthfront is an automated investment service that relies solely on software to acquire and manage client accounts. Traditional investment services have many humans in the loop, advising clients and taking fees. The problem with these older advisory services is that the advice that these services are applying is often so systematic that a computer could give the same answer, or an even better answer. Wealthfront takes a new approach with software-driven automated investment that provides better returns through software engineering. Go to wealthfront.com/SE daily to get a special offer for our listeners. $15,000 managed for free when you open your account. Don't pay commissions and account fees. Maximize your gains with Wealthfront's set it and forget it investment automation. Check out wealthfront.com/SE daily. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and it would also introduce you to the world of automated investment, so you can see if you like it or not. Wealthfront.com/SE daily. Thanks to Wealthfront for sponsoring the show. You've been a loyal sponsor, and we really appreciate it. Now let's get on with the show. So I want to get some more context here for what was going on when you went through this experience of trying to make a Webpack plugin and then eventually stumbling onto this PurifyCSS idea and building that. Mm-hmm. What was going on in your life when you and your team started working on this project?
Yeah, so this whole time I've just been saying like we. So it's like me and my team, we were part of a coding bootcamp. We were called Hack Reactor. It's really, really great. We were in our project phase. And basically the project phase is they give you time to create something to pretty much like land you a job, essentially, like after the coding bootcamp is done. And then it's like supposed to be all of your learning distilled into one project. And yeah.
So I want to touch on that a little more because this is a really interesting background. You've actually attended 2 different coding boot camps. Can you tell me about that? What is your educational background? Did you go to college, or did you just graduate high school and go to 2 coding boot camps?
I graduated high school. I knew that I never went to college, and it wasn't a decision where it was like, oh, I'm not going to go to college because I'm going to go to a coding boot camp. Actually, like I just didn't go to college. I had like no like backup.
Because you knew it was a scam.
Because I knew it was a scam. I didn't know how far you wanted to take it on this. I didn't know how.
Well, no. Let's take it as far as we can. I mean, listeners to this show kind of know my perspective on that. I went to college, but and so it's kind of impossible for me to say it's a complete scam because I'm happy with how I turned out. But looking at it objectively, it's a scam. So from your perspective, like, why did you come to that conclusion?
It's just because I don't know. I never really liked school. I never really did well in school. So, and to me, it just felt like the internet had like a lot of, you can learn so much more on the internet. My original goal was to pretty much try all these different things. I can probably learn how to code just from the internet. And then that's how I feel really lucky. Like that's when coding bootcamps started taking off. And then I found that, and that really like jump started it. Like it really like was a catalyst essentially. But I think it's really interesting that you said that, because recently on Hacker News, I don't know if you saw it, but there was this thing where it's from Triple Byte.
The Triple Byte post, yeah.
It just compared CS grads with coding bootcamp grads, and
over a large sample size.
Yeah, over a large sample size, and it's pretty crazy. Like the practical programming was essentially on the same level.
Well, and what was interesting about that post was that Aman, the guy that wrote it, he said that like, actually, it seems like people from coding boot camps do really well in interviews, and also people who went to university do really well in interviews, and they do well on disjoint things. They each have their own strengths. And when I read that, I was like, is he just being diplomatic? Like, is he being truthful, or is he being diplomatic?
Right.
Because when I was reading that, I was like, it sounds like if you're a company, you just want the coding bootcamp person every day. You don't want the academically educated. I mean, maybe you do, and on occasion, but like, I don't know. Did you get that impression reading it, or did it seem like there really is some strong attributes that you get out of a university education that you don't get from a coding bootcamp education?
No, I think like one of the best things that you get from a bootcamp is like you know what it feels like when you're learning quickly. Like you kind of get that memory of, okay, this is what it feels like when you're learning really, really quickly. I think, if you go to university, it's kind of like spread out across years, basically. And
that's their business model.
And that's their business model.
To protract it.
Yeah, and making that money every year.
Yeah, they have a great IRR at the university. So not to, I guess, harp on that too much. Well, no, sure, let's harp on it a little more. So tell me about
talking about this.
I know, me too. Okay, so you went to one coding boot camp,
right?
And then you ended up going to another. Was this like your graduate school, like university and then graduate school, or what? Like, what was that process like?
I was trying to get, like, my PhD, I was trying to double down on that. And then, no, but basically, okay. So what happened was I went to App Academy. I was in the second ever cohort. I mean, really, it was the first, because the first one was for iOS, and then I was for the first one for Rails. And then after that, I remember after that, like, I was the only one in the cohort, I think, that didn't go for a job. Like, everybody else in that cohort went and got a job. I think I just wanted to work on my own projects and stuff like that, because like that was kind of like the whole reason why I wanted to code, was for just to build my own personal projects, basically. And so after that, I took, I think it was like 2 years. 2 years, just went home and just worked on the projects that I wanted to work on, really. And
wow, so you just like moved back in with your parents and just worked on your coding projects?
Yeah, seriously. And I mean, I love that experience. I think I learned so much, like, without doing that, and then like taking the next coding bootcamp because I wanted to learn JavaScript. And like without that experience, I wouldn't have done such a like outlandish kind of project at the end of Hack Reactor, the second one, because in your project phase, 90% of the people just do apps, right? Because, you want to play it safe. You want to do something that just shows, like, I know how to code. Like, I know what I'm doing. But let's say PurifyCSS, right? If you looked at the source code of PurifyCSS, it's probably 1,000 lines. And you're not using React. You're not using Angular. Like, it's just 1,000 lines of JavaScript. Like, let's say Purify bombed, right? Like, it went nowhere. You would essentially be going into the job search with like, okay, I have like this 1,000 line pure JavaScript thing. And like most, I mean, the good companies don't do this, but like, there's a lot of companies that are just like, okay, show me your experience with XYZ framework, so I know that you can contribute. So then it was kind of risky, but I mean, what I'm trying to
except that it's actually not, because by setting yourself up for that situation, you're filtering against these terrible cookie cutter job hunt processes.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but like, if PurifyCSS didn't take off the way it did, I don't think it would have really like helped me as much for the good companies. If I was going for that kind of thing.
But in the long run, I think this is what some people miss, is that the real important part is to understand how to force yourself to like have an insight about, well, first you have an insight about something, and then it's to force yourself to take action on that insight and build a project around it and believe throughout the process that it's a worthwhile project to work on, whether or not you're taking like the probabilistic approach of the probabilistic assessment that like maybe this will work out, maybe it won't. You essentially just say, this is an insight I'm having, and I don't care if other people believe it. I'm going to follow through with it and work on the project. And overcoming that fear is actually like in the long run, that is going to serve you much better than any sort of conventionality that maybe helps you navigate the herd mentality job market a little better in the near term.
Yeah, definitely. Like that strategy I was talking about is like, if your number one goal in life was to like be employed, like that would be the strategy that you take. Like obviously, like actually when you go to a boot camp, like your vision can be really, really short term. Like dang, I really want to get a job after. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of like things to work on, like definitely you should definitely think about, doing things that would actually be useful, whether it's an app or some random module, and it's like, how much can you learn? And actually, I think one of the benefits of working on something like this is like, you almost like while I was working on Purify, like I almost got that feeling. It was like, okay, I think there's like something here. I think this could actually be used by a lot of other people. And you almost like remember that feeling, that you always want to get that feeling every time you want to work on a personal project.
Right. That momentum. Okay. So I want to take the devil's advocate approach here a little bit. So the university, this is where Apache Spark came out of. This is where Apache Mesos came out of. You work at Mesosphere now. We'll get into that. But, and I find your story about PurifyCSS interesting because it's the first instance I've heard of a really useful open source tool coming out of a coding boot camp. And maybe it's not the first occurrence, but it's the first time I've heard of it. And so the question is like, can even more advanced tools come out of this coding bootcamp environment? Can something on the scale and scope of Apache Spark or Apache Mesos, these things that took a long time to marinate in the minds of the researchers who were working at Berkeley, in this university environment that we've lauded for so long, can this level of ingenuity and long-term project thinking, can this come out of a coding bootcamp also?
Well, see, it's really tough because one of the coding bootcamp's priority is like get you a job. Like they want to have that stat where it's like 99% of the students got like 100K salary or something like that. So like that's their priority. I think if you really wanted to create some organization where like it really fosters like really risky things and stuff like that, you just cannot have that priority. I think we were kind of like an edge case where we didn't go down the app route. But actually I got to give Hack Reactor some credit here, because like the way they do the project period is we are not the only ones who did something crazy. Like if you look at the history of Hack Reactor, like more than any other bootcamp, I believe, is like there are a lot of these like hard technical projects that are taken during the project period. So, and Hack Reactor kind of did that by letting you pick your project. Like you essentially pick your project. They kind of encourage it too. They kind of encourage the risk taking. Whereas like for App Academy, they had essentially like one goal. And it was like, build something, don't do anything crazy, just build something that demonstrates your skills. So just that difference, like you can have some, you can foster some, you know, like hard technical project, but if you have that priority of getting your students a job, you just can't have that short term thing. So it's going to be really tough.
How do you think this coding bootcamp market is going to shape out? I mean, it's a very interesting result that you are the first person who I've heard of who's done 2 different coding boot camps. I'm sure there are others, but you did 2 high quality coding boot camps. I have heard of these people who go to these low quality coding boot camps and they're like, well, that sucked, and then they go to App Academy or Hack Reactor after that. But you went to App Academy, which is high quality, and then you went to Hack Reactor, which is high quality. And then, you could go to another coding bootcamp in the future. Maybe if they make a super sophisticated 8-month or 8-week bootcamp. And how is this going to shape out? Is this going to be some replacement for university where you have like a la carte coding bootcamp sequence that you can seek out? Or how do you see that evolving over time?
Like, it's just insane the value that you get with a coding bootcamp. Like, let's say Hack Reactor, right? Like the tuition is like $18K. Like the likelihood of you getting a job is really high. I think it was like 99%. And then you're going to pay that off within like the first several months of your first job. And then not only do you pay it back, but like now you have like this insane skill that you didn't have before. So like the boot camps value wise, it's just insane. Now there's like data science boot camps coming up now. Like I do think that's the way that it's going to move towards. Something interesting though is that I've noticed that there's like boot camps, right? That pretty much make you good enough to get a job. And then there's this whole other sector, which is basically like a boot camp to get into a boot camp. It's like the pre-boot camp.
Oh yeah.
It's like, so I think that's an interesting trajectory. Is like the barrier is like moving lower. It's like there's a boot camp to get into boot camp, and then it's going to keep moving down. Like the barriers are just going to become so low for you to just start picking something up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really interesting. Can this be replicated for other skills and stuff like that? I don't know, because programming, like the demand is like really high. I don't know if you can just do this for like something else. That's going to be hard to say.
Yeah, I'll be concerned if there's like a surgery boot camp that starts soon.
Yeah. Like the stat for surgery would be like 98% of our doctors didn't kill somebody accidentally.
Right. Exactly. So, okay. Today you work at Mesosphere. You work on front-end development at Mesosphere. We think of Mesos as a back-end technology. It is this data center operating system. Listeners may have heard episodes about Kubernetes or other scheduler type of tools like Mesos. I guess give me an overview of what Mesos does from your perspective, and what the company Mesosphere does, and what you're working on there.
So basically, like the best analogy that I heard describes what all of this does is like, on your computer you have multiple cores, right? And like whenever you launch an application, like if you open up Chrome and you have 4 cores, you don't have to pick like what core you want to run it on. Like you just open the application, and in the background it just kind of distributes the work however it should. So I think you can think of like every node as a kind of core, and you can run applications on all of these nodes. You don't have to worry about any of the nodes. You can just treat it as one huge computer. So I think like that's what Mesos is trying to do.
And so what kind of work do you do? What kind of problems are there on the front end? What does the front end of Mesosphere provide?
Right. So the front end of Mesosphere is like we work on the DCOS, the UI for DCOS, which is Data Center Operating System, and basically like that's like the UI for you to run applications. That and like you can see all of your cores and you can just run your applications, and like that's like your interface to do that. So that's what I work on.
In terms of competitive edge with these different scheduler technologies, like particularly with Kubernetes, I think of Kubernetes and Mesosphere as competitors. Whether or not, I mean, some people don't, or some people say they're synergistic, and maybe that's the case. But from my surveying the technology landscape, it seems like they're in competition. And one of the axes where competition is really, really important between the two is this usability layer, this front end interfacing layer that almost guides how easily it is for somebody to onboard with these highly complex technologies. Do you agree with that assessment?
So like one of the you're saying one of the places where like it's really going to matter is like basically the usability of it. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think usability is definitely important, but UI, it plays a key role in the usability, and I'm wondering, I guess, if you agree with that entire thesis. Like, how important is the usability, or is there some technical advantage between Kubernetes or Mesos that I'm missing here, or do these mostly seem like somewhat redundant technologies where the usability layer is really one of the defining characteristics?
I mean, like, the usability layer is definitely going to be one of the defining characteristics, like, no matter what. Like, you just want the barrier to using the product to be super low. Like, you just press a couple buttons and you're basically doing all of this work that it used to take, like, specialists to do. So like Mesosphere has been, it's actually, I'm impressed. Like their focus on design has been really huge. They've acquired like a design studio in the past. They're still here. They really care about making it really easy to use. So yeah. So I mean that definitely is going to be one of the defining characteristics.
So given that you work on the front end of Mesosphere, which is a company that, we would typically think of as a back-end company, but as you pointed out, they acquired a design studio. They obviously are concerned with the front end. But in any case, because you work at the front end of a back-end company, this gives you exposure to all levels of the modern application stack. So I'm very curious, what is your holistic view for how application development is evolving? How is this going to look from end to end, going into the future?
Well, like the amount of resources that's going to be available, like to you as a developer, is going to be crazy, because like you're gonna be able to create these applications that can utilize all of these nodes, and it'll be super simple for you to do. And I think that's something that Mesosphere has been working on. Like, we kind of have this concept of universe where it's kind of like this app store for distributed system applications. You can just install it, you can use it. It's almost like you're basically using an app on your Mac or on your phone, except it's using the whole data center. So I think the way that they put it was like there was like the operating system for your computer, and there was an operating system for your phone, and now we're going to bring that to the data center where you can create these programs that can run on top of that. Just like Uber, the app, runs on your phone, you can create other applications that would run on the data center, and you can use all those resources.
And it is such a bright future, and I'm curious, have you thought about what those apps might be? I mean, we always have this thing where, we can see what we should build in order to give the next generation of programmers the tools that they need, but oftentimes we can't anticipate what they're going to build. The one thing I can see that people would really be utilizing once distributed computing becomes a lot easier is, a machine learning framework like TensorFlow. They could utilize that much more easily if you can just click a button and install TensorFlow on your into your app and quickly begin utilizing it. But what kinds of things do you think we're going to be utilizing?
I think the only thing I'm sure of is that it's going to be unexpected, that, because nobody could have predicted Uber, and it's and how quickly it just took over, our habits and stuff like that. So it's for sure it's going to be unexpected. I think it's going to be unforeseeable, to be honest. But then it's going to be interesting because you have this new level that you can build things on, and the possibilities are going to be really interesting. But I have no idea what's going to be coming.
Well, we've talked about CSS, we've talked about coding boot camps, and now we have ended with talking about the data center operating system and the future of computing. So this has been a great conversation. We've covered basically everything.
We talked about surgical boot camps. That's going to be the future. Forget data centers.
Oh, what am I doing with this podcast? I need to start a surgery boot camp. Okay, well, thanks for coming on the show, Kenny. This has been a great conversation.
All right, thanks for having me.